One of the skeptics asked me in a debate I was in one time, he said, "Now, Mr. Hovind, could you please tell the audience how the freshwater fish survived in Noah's flood?" Interesting question, because today freshwater fish and saltwater fish, can't survive in the opposite environment very long. I said, "Well, sir, and Eric, you'll find this as you speak, most of the skeptics, their question is based on a faulty assumption. And all you got to do is look at the question they're asking you and find out where your problem is." Like the guy said, we've got 135,000 layers of ice that are annual rings. How did this happen in 4,400 years? Well, his question contains a faulty assumption. They're not annual rings. So this guy said, "How did the freshwater fish survive in the flood?" I said, "Well, sir, you're assuming the flood was salt water." I mean, isn't that an obvious assumption in his question? He said, "Well, the ocean is salt water." I said, "Well, yes, sir, it is today. That doesn't mean it was during the flood. I think during the flood it was probably all fresh water, or mostly fresh water, and all the animals were fresh water. And in the last 4,400 years, many animals have become saltwater adapted. They have adapted to salt water." And he said, "Well, see, that's evolution." I said, "No, sir. Today we have freshwater alligators and saltwater alligators. And they probably had a common ancestor, an alligator." He said, "Well, see, that's evolution." I said, "Man, come on, think about it. Going from a freshwater alligator to a saltwater alligator is a very minor change compared to what you think happened. You think they changed from a rock to an alligator, which, of course, would be a very big change." There was a fellow in Minnesota, and I wish I'd written down the details, but anybody could try this experiment, I suppose. He came to me after a seminar one time, and he said, "Mr. Hovind, I raise fish. I love fish. I have an aquarium. I have 2 aquariums, actually, huge aquariums in my house." He said, "I have a saltwater aquarium and a freshwater aquarium." He said, "Now, I know that ocean water is about 3.6% salt." He said, "I got curious many years ago. I wondered if I could mix all my fish together." He said, "So I figured out the mathematics behind slowly increasing the salt in my freshwater aquarium. Because every few weeks you got to change the water, change half of the water every 2 weeks or something like that." So he did all the math on how to add salt to his freshwater and subtract salt from his saltwater aquarium. He did it very slowly so that it took him 10 years to make the change. After 10 years, both aquariums were 1.8% salt. All of the fish doing fine, and so he mixed them all together. Now, if somebody can do that in 10 years, going from 0 to 1.8% salt, do you think in 4,400 years the fish or animals could adapt to a salt change from 0 to 3.6%? Well, that's no problem. The evolutionists are great at straining out gnats and then swallowing camels. They will pick on one little detail they don't agree with on the creation account, like how did Noah fit all those animals on the boat? I said, "Well, I don't know." So I say, "You couldn't be done." Just because I don't know doesn't mean it couldn't be done. Okay? Secondly, the fact that this is an unanswered question so far doesn't prove we all came from a rock. Strain out the gnat and swallow a camel. They're just really good at it. So the saltwater to freshwater change probably took place after the flood. And even today, there are huge salt domes underground that are leaking into the oceans. The ocean is gaining salt from all sorts of places. In Grand Saline, Texas, halfway from Longview to Dallas, the town called Grand Saline. Saline means salt. Years ago, it was discovered right on the surface of the ground there was pure salt. Animals would stop there and lick it all the time. So they began to dig it out and sell it. And they kept digging down and found out it's what's called a salt plume. It is absolutely enormous. There are hundreds and hundreds of people that work at this salt mine, if I understand it. Here's the surface of the ground. They had seen a little patch of salt right here. It turned out to be a massive salt plume. Apparently, from way down deep inside the earth, this was hot and bubbling, and it came up and solidified just before it popped out through the surface. It's pure salt. They dig into it with bulldozers and backhoes and everything else. I mean, it's gigantic. It's many miles across of solid, pure salt. Be a good thing for you to do, Eric, is to look up salt in the encyclopedia and just read, and you can see some of the pictures of this. And when they dig it out, of course, you can't just dig it all out because your roof falls in. So they will dig tunnels down and dig shafts off to the side And even when they're digging off to the side, they can't dig a big area out because the roof falls in. If you looked at it from the top, they dig what's called a checkerboard pattern. They leave little squares of pillars to hold the roof up. And they dig out everything in between. And they've calculated, how hard is the salt, how much weight can it hold, and how big does our pillar have to be, and, et cetera, et cetera. They want to dig out the maximum without having it collapse on them. So they can only actually mine a certain percentage of it, maybe 40%, and the rest is wasted just as structural support. It's that way with any underground mine. They have to leave some material behind. So the salt in the ocean is not a problem for the creationists. Probably the oceans were largely freshwater at the time of the flood. There may have been some mixing of water. May have been some saltwater animals before the flood, maybe saltwater lakes like we have today. I don't know. But this is no problem we have to worry about.